Today in the studio we have our special guest here. His name is Dennis Fisher. Dennis Fisher is the new mayor of Dayton, Minnesota. Dennis, welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me here.
This is a new podcast we might call it Mayorcast. We don't know what we're going to call it yet, but it's going to be something so you guys in the city of Dayton can listen to Dennis's own words. Now, Dennis has agreed to come in here and talk about things, and you know what? We're going to start out with, Dennis, tell us about yourself.
Well, I was born in Brooklyn Park, so I've been a Minnesota native forever. Came here in the early to mid-'70s. I think 6th grade was my first grade here, and I've been here ever since, other than a stint in the Air Force. So I've moved a couple times within Dayton, and I've paid attention to city politics for years, since maybe the late 90s, and just never really found the time to do anything. I've been on various commissions, been on the Park Commission, Public Safety, and then ran for council a couple years back, and here I am as mayor.
That's awesome. And we thank you for your public service. So let's jump into some questions here that maybe some people out there in Dayton have. And we'll put this podcast in either Dennis's main or we'll put it in its own format so you guys can listen to it, send emails to where you need to, and of course we'll give you those later in the show. All right, Dennis, the last election was a pretty strange election. And how did you feel that the people were responding to your way of thinking?
Well, I got, I think, given the election outcome, I think this makes sense. I got a lot of positive feedback. I think people were a little bit ready for a change in thinking. There was a continuous hammering back on actually, I shouldn't say hammering, but the feedback I got was overwhelmingly they were tired of our high taxes. And, we've always had the excuse that, well, Dayton's sparsely populated, therefore we have high taxes. Well, since I want to say 4 or 5 years ago when the development really started moving in, we've increased our housing by about 50%. And yet we were roughly at the same tax rate. In fact, if you calculate the taxes that we've added into the tax rate actually went up. So I got a lot of feedback saying that they wanted that dealt with. Overall, that was easily number one. Number two, there was some concern about the development rate and and I get that. I understand that. And I also agree that our rate is scary at times. From the standpoint of infrastructure, our rate is so high right now that you never know what kind of oops is going to happen. So we had a problem with water not long ago. It wouldn't surprise me if at some point we're going to have, some other issues with the roads. I also agree our rate is too high. The problem with it is it can take years for that rate adjustment to actually show itself. So every single house that's going in today was approved, at least by the previous council. And in fact, much of it was approved years back.
I see.
So it's something that has a lot of momentum, and you can make a change today and you won't see that effect for years. Right.
And again, we'll get into the water issue maybe in this episode or future episodes. Right now, we just want to make sure that you are, how you doing with all the mayor thing, with the family and the time it's taking? Because it's very demanding.
It is. And, when I was on council, it was always clear to me that the amount of time it takes is the amount of time you put into it. Some members over time I've watched, and they don't really think about it until they get the packet. And a lot of times they don't even read the packet until the meeting. That was always frustrating to watch. I'm not sure why, they felt the need to be on a council. If you're not going to put some effort into it, why are you there?
So that leads to people just nodding their head and agreeing with someone who did read the council and not really having an opinion on it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. So if you want a situation where, you have one or two people making those decisions, well, that's what you had. Mm-hmm. And that's frustrating to me because, ideally I would like to see, 4 or 5 opinions that are not necessarily in disagreement, but at least different opinions you can chew on.
I see.
Because when you have a council that is all of one opinion and suddenly, that opinion goes in the ditch, you got a problem because you've just got, 3 or 4 votes that put you in the ditch.
Mm-hmm. Right. And the beginnings of tyranny.
Yeah. At some point it can get, at least less people at some point will put some stuff together and make a change. But in the meantime, you can have a lot of bad things happen that you don't necessarily see. So, right. For example, things like the comp plan, for example. I have a lot of people come up to me and say, why are we doing this? This activity, for example, down by the interchange. Well, that was kind of set in stone when the interchange happened. And in fact, a lot of it when the comp plan changes were made. So you don't necessarily see those until it's too late. So that's why I always tell people, if you can't pay attention, at least pay attention to who you're voting for, because one way or another, if something in that comp plan is not to your liking,
it's too late.
It's too late.
Yeah, it's going to come back and bite you.
Yeah, and I can't feel sorry for people because in a way, people shouldn't have to babysit their government, mm-hmm. Especially at the city level. The problem is, there's been instances where they really should have. So
yes, and I believe we had that with the previous administration where they weren't getting babysat and they run amok.
Well, and like I said, the comp plan, to me, here's the other deal. The comp plan also kind of sets in motion how much development you're having. Huh. And so we ended up putting a lot of land in that 2020 timeframe. It was more land than I wanted, and I was fairly vocal about bringing that down. But at the time, it was, I only had one vote out of the
council. Yeah,
pretty much 3 that wanted it as it was. And so, yeah. So again, that comp plan is important. It kind of lays the groundwork for how you can really get ramrodded. So,
and I do know that. According to the voting record, which I pay attention to, there was a lot of 4-1s out there, and you're always that one.
Yeah, it kind of depends on what. I tried to pick battles that to me were important to people. The franchise fee I felt was just a complete sham. Mm-hmm. So there was a 4-1.
Yep.
My problem with the franchise fee wasn't necessarily that it was a tax, but that it's a hidden tax and it's not counted when people run around spewing the tax rate, anything to do with the tax rate. It's not calculated into that rate. So
let's take an example on that rate. So let's say I'm a citizen, I'm a business over there. And if I have a $100 water bill, the franchise fee, would that include on that, or was that just utilities?
The franchise fee is just on electric and natural gas. So if you have a propane tank, you don't get hit with it.
Okay.
But it's electric and it's natural gas, and it's $4 per resident, the small meters. So you pay it by the size of your meters. Mm-hmm. So a standard residential meter, you'll pay $4 a month on gas, $4 a month on electric. So it's $96 a year, which isn't a lot for most people. Mm-hmm. But if you're on fixed income, it's going to hammer you. Not only that, but a few people I found have multiple meters. Depending on how they count them, they were paying per meter. So again, to me, it was a kind of not obvious way of taxing people. And to me, if you want to tax people, come out and tax people. But
so you felt it was a hidden cost that was out in the open.
Yeah. Yeah, I also had a problem with people don't necessarily like to hear this, but I think the bottom line is I think the franchise tax is unconstitutional. I don't know how you can read the state Article 10. I don't know how you can read that any other way.
So you feel it's a taxation without representation?
No, it's a tax on certain things that you are not supposed to be able to tax. So, for example, nonprofits, churches, various groups. It's very clear in the state constitution you cannot tax these groups, and yet there it is.
And how did this start? How did this taxation, this franchise fee start up, and who started it?
Well, so I know it came up, again, like I said, I've always paid attention to city politics. I've been going to council meetings, probably every other one, for 10 plus years. So it's been floated for quite a while. I think I first heard it probably about 6 or so years ago. Mm-hmm. So then the interchange came up. The interchange started happening. About the time I got on the council, suddenly, one of our first meetings is a work session on how we're going to come up with another $4 million that we're short on the interchange.
I remember that.
It was irritating to me because here's this project that's been in the works for years, and all of a sudden we're told, well, we got to come up with $4 million. Well, at the time, our yearly budget was about $4 million. And so, my answer was, well, how did we get into this situation? That didn't go over very long, or very well, rather. Mm-hmm. And so then the discussion was, well, let's assess for that, everybody in the area. And I said, well, I'm not going to be for assessing that full $4 million to everybody in the area, because, the current council had been running around telling people it's going to benefit the whole city. So I said, hey, that means the city needs to have a part in this.
I see.
And so I was okay with half. Well, at least one of the other council members wanted to assess even more than that, because they thought, hey, we can make some money on this, because it gets into the minutia about how assessments work. But you can assess, regardless of the project, if you can show a benefit to an area, say, of $8 million, you can assess up to $8 million. Well, luckily, at some point, the assessor, the numbers came in, and we could only assess $2 million, because that's the only benefit that was being shown at the time. So in the end, I think one of the councilmen probably was in the same boat I was, where they didn't want this whole $4 million on that area. So I suspect it would have been 3-2, but luckily the numbers came in that said you can only do 2. Well, then the next question was, well, how do we, it wasn't overtly stated, but it was very clear they didn't want it showing up on the property tax. Everybody knew this franchise tax was going to show up on the property tax rate, because it doesn't work into the rate, because it's not assigned by property value. And so when I mentioned the fact that, why are we looking at this? Why don't we put it on the property tax itself? And that was the answer I got back. Well, it's going to show up as a rate increase. And I said, well, but it's a tax increase. And yeah, it was just kind of a mess.
I see.
So.
And who was admin at the time this happened? Is that our current admin now?
Admin is in...
Yeah, who was our city administrator at the time that this all started?
Oh, it was the same one.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't know that she necessarily pushed either way. It was the council that was really pushing to get a franchise fee. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, when I first heard about this franchise fee, I thought, well, that kind of makes sense. It's roads. It's for everybody. everybody plays a part in this. But then, over time, I started looking at it harder and realized that, A, it doesn't show up in the property tax rate. And B, it blatantly flies in the face of the Constitution. Now, a lot of cities have it. The answer is always, well, everybody's doing it. And
so if they're getting away with it, we can.
Yeah, and the thing is our legal side said, well, it's constitutional. I said, well, how do you read this then? And they said, well, it's never been challenged. It's not going to be. And my answer was, I don't care if it hasn't been challenged. Harstead, this gets into something else, but for the longest time, cities were charging developments transportation fees, and everybody was doing it. And nobody had ever challenged it until somebody finally challenged it. And it took, the judge a very short amount of time to say, you can't do this.
Right. And that's a topic we're going to cover later. So don't push on that right now, because that's building phase.
Sure.
When I say we, and I have to put my clarification here, I have a business in Dayton, and I've also served as an EDA head. So if you hear me out there saying we, it's a we. And again, we serve to the council, and we try to do things that they need done. Now, back to what you said about the city or the previous council pushing this through, and you were forewarned on this. You didn't want the tax, but you want it to show up as a tax. How are you going to handle that now for current citizens? Is there a change coming, or is it just going to stay status quo?
That will probably change. Or I shouldn't say probably change. It probably won't change. To be blunt, there's 1,000 things I'd like to change. It is unbelievably difficult to get things changed, especially once they're put in there. I think now I do know that, it's a fixed value. So over time, it effectively becomes smaller and smaller. But I've got a long list of things that I think
you want that demand your attention.
That demand attention. Yeah. And like I said before, some of these things I'd like to nip in the bud, but once that's in there and in place, it's very hard to root it out.
And you need a council behind you to do so. I get it.
Yeah. And I just, there's just so many other issues.
Hold a higher priority.
Well, they do. And there's a lot of issues that I think are just as important as that one, and they probably won't get addressed either, because one of the things that I've learned is that to turn this ship it does not turn on a dime, especially if you're bucking staff. That can get frustrating, and it's not overt, but there's mechanisms in place that really, things take months and months and sometimes years to turn.
Untrain, right. Yeah. And we'll cover that again in another segment of its own staffing issues. So let's get back to the people now. If people want to engage in this, and they want to give you their opinion, how do they do so?
Well, they can get a hold of me pretty easily, either through, when you go to my website, dennisfisher.org, I've got my phone number there. I've got my email address. You can subscribe to my updates. And people kind of find this hard to believe, but one of the things that I make it a habit of doing, I do have a lot of demands on my time. I'm also the president of the Lions. I've got a full-time job. But if somebody calls me and says, hey, can you come over and talk to me about this? I will be over there. Because one of the things that has always bothered me about, and sometimes, by the way, when I do go over there, I don't give them the right answers. They don't necessarily like my answer.
But you make an effort that you get on the property, you have this face-to-face.
Yeah. And again, sometimes it's just a misunderstanding of how things work or how they're going to lay out. So I try to make an effort to actually give them some FaceTime, because, like I said, it's much easier to explain sometimes, at least over the phone, or, like I said, I prefer it in person. Rarely do things get resolved very cleanly on email unless it's an easy question.
Sure.
Because there's so many nuances to so many things.
And not that I'm comparing you to the previous mayor, but I do believe now we have one where we did it before, but he just kind of lost his way, and I don't like to go into that with anybody. But I do know that on the street, you hear people are very appreciative of your time when you come out to their place and have that conversation.
Yeah, and again, to me, a lot of times they will ask me, they will give me some question or how do they want to know how to go about something or why something is a certain way. Again, once they understand a lot of the details, an example of that is a lot of the commercial development that's going on around the interchange. There's still some residential areas there, and those people are frustrated.
Mm.
They're frustrated because they see commercial development all around them. They see, a golf course that is now turning into a big warehouse, and they're frustrated. And the problem is that all that activity was put into motion years ago. Like I said before, that comp plan, put that into motion, the interchange, put that into motion. I can tell you that when I ran for council, it shocked me how many people didn't have any idea we were putting in an interchange. Mm-hmm. There were people, that were totally blown over by the fact that, and the thing is almost entirely the population was not happy with that, or they were totally not really focused on it. They did. There was hardly anybody that said, yeah, go interchange.
So do you feel they've been conditioned to ignore it, or just they weren't in the know enough?
Well, so, again, one of the things that I've never liked about how the city operates is a lot of times they will do what they're legally required to do to let people know what's going on, which is fine, which is their responsibility. But to me, it's not enough. They have kind of bumped that a little bit. So the last interchange open house we had, they actually doubled the radius on the number of people that they notified, which is good. But I think a lot of what goes on is, you let things slowly creep up on people, letting the public know about certain things.
Oh, public notice.
Yep. You have to let them know. But by then, all the wheels are in motion and the answer's already been decided.
Let's back this up a little bit.
Sure.
If you've got the notice, and I hear this a lot because, I see everybody every 3,000 miles. That's about their oil change. And a lot of them feel that if they've already got the notice, they already have no say in what's going on. How do you feel about that?
That is, for the most part, true. By the time you get to the meetings, there's enough stuff and put into play that it's kind of a done deal, and what they're doing is checking a checkbox. Wow. Now, that sounds a little bit negative, but that's just how things operate. By the time you're notified of something, the momentum is there.
And I can cite this because on our side of the city, we had a Sands building go in.
Right.
And come to the meeting, and we had all the proper information that came in the mail. They did what they did. That box that they checked, like you said, was there. But by the time you got there, it was like, we felt it was too bad, so sad. This is already happening, and we're just here to, again, check your box.
Right. And part of it is that's also how people work. They don't really keep their eyes on things until it's right in their face.
Too late.
It's too late. Yep. And that's why, again, I tell people over and over again, if you hear that there's a comp plan commission being formed, be on it. Things like that. If you see or hear something,
act right away.
Feel free to call me or get a hold of me or get a hold of one of the council and at least ask them what's going on. Because depending on what it is, there's, sometimes they'll hear about something on Facebook, and depending on, the source, it could be totally opposite of what they're hearing.
Yeah, we had a lot of that during the election.
Yeah.
There's a lot of disinformation out there.
Yep, there is.
And, I run one of the pages, and I always try to tell everybody, look, engage.
Right.
Find out what's going on. Dig for yourself. Don't just trust social media to hand it to you in a silver box.
Yeah. And the other thing for people to keep in mind is that if you're being told something, A, pay attention to who's telling it to you, and B, just know that you may not be getting the full story, or you're getting a twist on things. Again, it's people shouldn't have to always on guard for their city coming doing something that's not going to be favorable to them, but in reality, with so much activity happening in Dayton, you can't. There's a lot of moving parts right now, and like I said, I'm guessing that had I, 6-7 years ago, polled the residents and said, "Do you want an interchange?" I'm pretty sure the bulk would have said no.
Right.
But it's here, and now we got to make the best of it.
Well, the interchange would be okay, in my opinion. I'm on the other side of the city, but look at all the commercial that's going to be sprouting because of it.
Yes.
And what they don't understand is, again, as head of EDA, you need access. You need roads to make stuff happen, big trucks. Now, from what I remember, when I first jumped on EDA, we had a shot at Amazon. But Amazon, from what I understood, decided to pull out because there was no enough access. They had to go into Rogers, come back to that area. And that wasn't acceptable to them. They needed direct access to 94. So they bounced on us.
Yes. And we have, again, it's kind of, these are trade-offs. If you want your taxes brought down, you have to have commercial development and you have to have residential development. Well, I shouldn't say and, but somehow you have to increase the number of people paying, assuming that there's, nothing else can be used to bring that down. And there's side effects to that. We have a lot of development going on, and we have people being displaced out in the interchange area because that interchange is going in. So there's downsides to these things too.
Okay. Are the people being displaced, are they being taken care of, or are they just being bounced on?
Well, I mean, so again, this gets complicated too, but a lot of those people got assessed.
Wow.
And the way assessments work is, in my mind, is almost criminal.
Well, what people don't know about you is you're an anti-big government guy who's in government.
Yeah. And it isn't even necessarily, I just think that you have to look at the value of things.
Okay. Not
necessarily say, you don't want to spend money, but you look at the value of what you're doing. And if it makes sense, then you do it. I really have a hard time when we have some of these people, so there's a lot of properties over there.
Okay.
Getting back to the interchange, there's a lot of properties over there. I would guess that half or thereabouts were investment properties.
By who?
Various groups.
Okay, not the city then.
No.
Okay.
No, it'd be various LLCs that would pop up. They're investing in property. And to me, you assess them people because they're there for one reason.
Yep.
Because they want to put a commercial property on there. But I knew a number of people out there that had no plans to sell. They didn't want. They just wanted to sit on their porch, drink their coffee, and enjoy life. And because of what we decided to do in the comp plan, we decided that their property needs a McDonald's. And so the assessment comes through, and the way assessments work is you don't get assessed on what you want to do with your property. You get assessed on what the city wants to do with your property. So here are these people, he's sitting on his porch, drink coffee, and he gets suddenly a $20,000 bill. Because, suddenly we decided to put. Now, the counter to that is that his land is definitely going to be worth more. But some people aren't there to see what they can sell their property for. And that was my concern. And unfortunately, the way assessments work, we couldn't not assess certain properties.
Couldn't curb that number to make it more comfortable for the people who didn't want to sell.
Yeah, we could. So we could exclude entire classes of properties, and that was the class that the city wanted them to be in. And we did. We excluded the low density residential. So that means if the city decided that your property was going to get standard housing, which we call low density, believe it or not, then we didn't assess. And there were many reasons why we did that. But if the city decided your property was going to get some sort of commercial zone or guided use, or industrial, or mixed use, or heavy residential, medium and high, you got assessed.
I see.
And the other problem with that whole deal was the way we did the assessment. There was a lot of questions. I had questions. I never really was happy with the answers as to how we determined those values. That ended up in court.
So don't we have counsel for this?
Yeah.
You had questions there, they had questions. So you said it's ended up in court, and couldn't our current counsel, I'm sorry, not city counsel, but legal counsel, couldn't they advise a better situation than putting us in a court?
They were confident if we did end up in court, that we would win. And the frustrating part of being on the council is that, so the city has representation. The residents who are on the other end have representation, although they pay for it. The council doesn't have somebody. What I really wanted was, hey, I want to know, does this make sense? And realistically, what are our chances here? And I sometimes I don't feel like we get that. We get, whether they think they can win a lawsuit or, and to me, maybe the question I'd like answered is, is this fair? Is this really something that I don't necessarily care if, we think we can get away with it. I want to know,
it's fair for everybody.
Is this really what the intent is? So, and that's hard to do.
Well, let me get you out of the ditch here on this one. I know that Champlin had the Crossings project going on. I don't know what to call it anymore. I was running for office at the time. And the people who were on the river road, next to the river, they did, and some didn't want to move. They didn't want to be part of this. So they instead of trying to just buy their way out of this, they started to strong-arm these people, and that got a lot of people sideways, including myself. So is it the right way for everybody? And we were talking to council at the time, and people who were on it says, look, you're only going to get these guys out of here with commas and zeros. And their attitude was, I'm not overpaying for this property. And I said, you don't get it. You can build all the way around them, they'll leave their property right there, but then you have a different fight.
Yes. And I've always said, as far as that goes, condemnation and
eminent domain, yeah.
And eminent domain is, I really have to be pushed to be okay with that. Like I said, some of these properties, we did end up doing that, but I went through the list. They were all investment groups. But when it comes to condemning private individuals, I have one heck of a time with that. In fact, I would have to have a massively convincing reason to do that. To me, if you want somebody's property, you make them an offer that they can't refuse.
Right. Commas and zeros. Add them in there.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to go, and if you want them to go, they got to be properly motivated. Now, that's stepping on their rights. If you're a person who says, I ain't moving, and if they use it as a tactic to hold out for higher numbers, then you know what? That's on the city. Then you write bigger checks. So, I mean, the eminent domain, I've also heard it called land grab, which really sits wrong with me. So when you say, we're going to do a land grab, and I heard that out of somebody on, our council, admin, and I'm thinking, it just takes the wrong person the right time to be switched on when you say land grab.
Yep. To me, I use, the term takings quite often, and that offends people sometimes. But, to me, if I really like your property and I don't have the ability to go over and say, look, you're going to take this money and I get your property. So, I really have a hard time when a city does that, when any level of government does that. And I get that sometimes you're trying to run, a freeway to here to there, and, one place stands out, that's a problem. But I just think it happens far too easily where we take people's property. And by take, I mean, we actually condemn it. We give them what we say it's worth.
Oh boy.
But I just, to me, there needs to be a significant, reason for doing that.
And again, because you are one of those people that don't like big government stepping on little guys, that sets you apart.
And I won't say I would never do it, but I just, it especially for things like, if, we took some property in the Pine View thing for trails.
Okay.
I don't know, that one was frustrating to me, because, that tells me, we should have, there was some side effects there that really irritated me by, what I mean by that is we also had, at least one landowner that had some significant trees taken out.
Okay.
Well, when that process goes through, trees aren't worth anything, which...
Well, they seem to be worth it when I want to add my addition. Oh, you take one down, put one up. I'm like, oh, hold on here.
See, the other way around. Yeah, when a developer wants to take out trees, then the city gets excited.
Because they can charge for the trees.
And then they charge $100 an inch for the tree or whatever it is for the trees. But yeah, when the city takes a tree from you, it's worth $0. Yeah, I don't know. Again, there's a lot of little things like that I just scratch my head at.
So there's 5 of you on our council, and would you name them off for the people?
Scott Solonic, Dave Fashant, Travis Henderson, she got elected when I got elected. The other 2, or Travis was elected when I got elected mayor, but Julie came in when I got elected to the council. But the other 2, Scott Solonic and Dave Fashant, we appointed. So when I ran for mayor, I was halfway through my term. And so the first thing we had to do was, once I was elected, we had to appoint somebody to fill my spot. And
so he's going to run the rest of your term.
Yep, he gets to run the rest of my term. And actually, we also had a council member get elected when I got elected mayor. And he ended up resigning here recently, and so that's how Dave Fashant got in. Now, when Troy, who was the one that resigned recently, he still had 3+ years left, and therefore we have to have a special election. So Dave Fashant will replace him until that special election, and that we were able to. That was a mess too, because staff thought that we had to have a special election here at the end of the year, and that would have been expensive. And I went through the state statute, and that's not how I read it. And so we had the attorney look at it, and he agreed with me. So we were able to save quite a bit of money there by having the election during a normally. So in 2022, we'll have a 2-year council term open. Okay,
and I do know that Troy Okerlund had other things going on in life that he couldn't finish his term. He was quite a go-getter. He had the number 1 in the polls the last election, and he was making things happen out there. How do you feel about his leaving?
That was frustrating to me, but yeah, he had a lot of intensity. Sometimes I think so when I mentioned before that, it's all how much being on council is, how much work you want to put into it. He put a boatload of work into it.
Oh, yes, he did.
And I think that didn't bode well for him. I think he ended up spending a lot more time on things than he really wanted to. But I think he's one of these guys that wants to zero in on things. And so there were quite a few things that I think would have been nice to have him still on. There were some things that was a little frustrating that the focus continued to be on certain things, but I think in the end he ended up moving. I think he
moved up north, and he was running his business for storage business.
Okay.
Yeah, so he was updating his company profile for storage business, and that's what he had to do because he lives a long ways away from that.
Right. So yeah, he did put a lot of energy into it, and and that energy was it would rub people the wrong way sometimes. So
well, politics can't be clean all the time, can it?
No.
He was your pit bull. He was the one who kept on a chain, and when you loosened him up, that's what I saw.
Yeah, he could be. There were some things he and I didn't always see eye to eye on, but to me, if you can get 5 energetic people on there, you're going to get a good answer.
5 different opinions, 5 different views, yes.
Yep. And you got to convince, at least 2 other people that here's why your opinion should hold. And that's why I think having this many different mindsets on there is overall a good idea.
Now, we are 45 minutes into this segment. What would you want to tell the people who are listening? Because I'm sure this is going to get out big on all the media platforms. What do you want them to know? What's your core, hey, this is what I think you guys should know?
Well, as far as the city goes, I mean, one of the things that I made very clear in my literature, in my talks with the people, was that we have lived with a significantly high tax rate for long enough. And like I said before, we have had a lot of new tax sources, i.e. houses, come in, and we have done, well, like I said, we've actually increased taxes. I want to see that go away. I want some significant hits to that rate in this year, and this year, actually, we're going to do, I think, okay.
9%, wasn't it?
It's so far, it's 9. I think we're going to do better than that by the time we get the final budget in December, but okay. 9 is still much better than we've done. And so in the past, well, here, let me back up a little bit. 9% may seem like a good increase to many people. The value that we have in this city, i.e. because of the new houses, or for the most part, the new houses, was actually an 18% increase. So when we say, we're only raising it 9%, what that really means to most of the homeowners out there is a tax cut. They will pay less in taxes. It's kind of thick, and there's a lot of nuances again. Even something as simple as taxes, tax rate, levy, capacity, those things interact. It's not straightforward what the check you write out is going to look like, but I can guarantee most people are going to see a cut in the check they have to write out.
I see.
And again, that gets into the fact that we have a lot more houses, even though we're going to spend more money this year by 9%, or tax more this year by 9%, the per house tax is going to drop. And I'd like to see that happen for a couple of years in a row to where, we get somewhat close to the municipalities around us as far as their tax rates go. Rogers is somewhere down in the mid 30s, I think. It's around 35. Now they've got a lot of commercial development that helps them.
They got a lot of commercial.
Yep. And so, if we can get that right now, ours is, and this is kind of funny, but we had an error creep into our tax rate calculations a couple times over the past few years. But what we started out this year was a 53% rate. That's just, it's ridiculous given that we're, 5 years into a significant housing boom explosion in our city.
What do you mean? What verb do you put on that?
Yeah.
Cosmic boom, sonic boom. Yeah, I would say it's the Wild West of Dayton.
It is, but I mean, it gets back to the comp plan. We had a lot of property in there, 4 or 5 years back. Otsego has had similar growth, but most of their housing is apartments.
High density.
High density, yeah. And we are putting in, on the outskirts, and again, this gets into another nuance of everything in the Met Council. We have certain requirements placed on us by them, and that's why you may see, on the outskirts of the city, townhomes going in, or, the Sands apartments. My goal is to keep those, away from the heart of the city, if it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need those high density areas to counter the lower density areas.
What is our per building acre per house?
Met Council requires an average of 3 houses per acre. What that means is, if we put an apartment in over here, let's say we have 5 acres worth of apartment over here. If we have 5 acres of, whatever the math works out to, on the other side to where it's like 1 an acre or 1 every couple acres, we're okay. Now, in reality, it's not that cut and dry. For the most part, these developments have been running around 2.7 houses per acre.
Okay.
We put in a recent change. This council pushed to try to knock that down a little bit. And so this council actually approved its first preliminary development. And I think that one came in at 2.4. Now, you may not think the difference between 2.7 and 2.4 is much, but in fact, it does help with the looks of things. That doesn't look like they're nearly as packed in. Now, in reality, they're still fairly dense. One of the things I'd like to see is, we've got some areas that have sparsely populated housing. To me, I think we should be looking at that again. We should be looking at that more.
Will you ever push 1 house in half acre?
Actually, what I'd like to see, and we are working on this, I don't know what the side effects are. I would like to see areas that we actually set aside for no sewer. That takes it out of the Met Council's hands, because at that point, it doesn't factor into the 3 per acre. If we go to an area and say, we can do 2 things. We can look at an area and say, this is never getting sewer. That never factors in. The other thing we can do is we can say, this area is getting sewered, but not till after 2050. And so therefore, this farmer can still sell his land. Maybe we knock that down to, 1 house per 10 acres or 1 house per 5 acre. But
so a 1 in 5, but never a 1 in 2 or 3, never a 1 in 1?
Yeah, I think those days are probably gone. Given septic systems, you probably need, well, I shouldn't even just blame it on septic systems, but I think it'd be difficult for us to push through
the 1 in 1?
1 in 1. It would be difficult, probably 1 in 2. I could maybe see 2.5. But to be honest, it's not a lot you can do with 2.5 acres. 5 works out well because then you can do something with it. But
yeah, but a lot of developers won't jump out of 1 in 5. They want to do a 1 in a quarter acre so that they can mass produce their numbers.
Yep, and there's still a market for a quarter acre house.
Mm-hmm.
I don't blame them for that. My whole shtick with developers is they're going to do what they need to do.
Yeah, to make money.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with that. My problem is that we have such a reluctance to put in large acre lots that it really, if you're a farmer in the 2050 area, you really can't sell your land. You can't do squat with it.
And there's many instances of that.
Yep. And we've had a couple people that I personally know that had large chunks of ag that they couldn't leave to their kids because of our 40 acre rule. And so that was frustrating to me.
Doesn't 1 in 40 seem a little exorbitant?
40, to me, it's ridiculous. But, if you want to put a city together and you want very tightly planned development, that's what you do. But that really throws a monkey wrench to anybody who wants to do something, who wants to retire or, like I said, give up 10 acres apiece to their kids or something.
Well, the old town, the old people of Dayton, the Leans, the Deans, the everybody's, this is their retirement, and for them to not want to sell or can't sell because of a 1 in 40 just seems ludicrous to me.
Yeah. It really depends. Like I said, if you're in there because you want your land eventually to be full of houses, then it may make sense to you. And we've still got a couple, properties that were subdivided long ago. And so I know there was some properties on Zanzibar that recently sold, and they had already been broken up years back. So,
yeah,
that's why they were able to do that. But I mean, to me, if you're in a 2040, 2050 area or plus,
that's comp plan now.
Yes, that's the comp plan. If you're in that area. So yeah, let me explain that a little bit. If the comp plan says that your land isn't developed until after 2050, you literally cannot do anything with it. Now, a developer might buy it, but
sit on it.
They might buy it and sit on it, but
yeah.
If it's that far out, I doubt they're going to sit on it that far out. So right now, you'd have to sell a 40-acre chunk, unless you're a developer, nobody can afford that.
Right.
So that's the quandary that we put them in. And to me, we need an outlet that lets them do that. And again, you talk to some of the ag owners, and they will argue that you shouldn't do that because, well, they want high development. They want very planned development, and a 5-acre lot doesn't do that for them.
Right. And they need more ROI on their investment.
Yep. So, but you run into other farmers who say this puts me up against the wall. I can't do anything with my land.
Yep.
So again, it's really hard to get something like that into place, but
and really, if you think about it, not that I'm a conspiracy theorist, but if these plans were put in way back to keep Dayton rural, because I know a lot of previous councils way, way, way back didn't want development. That's why we're in the situation we are now. And all of a sudden, here it is, the faucet's on, and we got to deal with these things that are in a comp plan decades before we even had something to say about.
Yeah, the 40-acre thing actually didn't get its genesis in that. I was actually at the Planning Commission meeting that put in place that 40-acre rule, and it was right around 2098, 99, somewhere in there.
Okay.
And the thinking was put forth, and it was kind of a surprise to the Planning Commission, but it was another one of these commissions that was driven by, 1 or 2 people. And the answer was they seen sewer coming. They didn't, and it was even stated at the meeting, I don't want, and this was talking about a 40-acre piece of land, I would much rather be fighting one owner than
10 owners.
Than 8 owners. So that was, at that point, they were looking at 5 acres.
1 in 5, okay.
He was pushing for 1 in 40. And he said, when sewer comes through, I don't want the city having to fight with, 8 different people. I want them to fight just one.
Well, that sounds like a mechanism to me.
And so it was, it was to guarantee that, you didn't have large lots, large residential lots. So, and I get it. If you're trying to put sewer in and you have, a 40-acre chunk and that sewer line's got to run through there. If you got 10-acre chunks, 5-acre chunks, you've effectively stopped that pipe. I get that. Mm-hmm. But if we can find a way to either A, get that pipe through there anyways, or put in, large lots somewhere else that doesn't block a line, then to me, it seems like we should be doing that, or we should be at least seriously considering that. Things like Thicket Hills. So right across from Daytona there.
Yep.
There's no line going through there. There's no line ever going to go through there. And those are all roughly 10-acre lots. They're very expensive homes. Those people are happy with those lots. So to me, we should be, I'd like to see, like I said, I'd like to see us doing more of that.
Okay.
And again, if we could, make an area work for 5 and maybe even 2.5. I'd be okay with that. So,
well, we are 61 minutes into this, and we were wondering if we were going to even fill up 20 minutes. So you rock this. Now, what we got to figure out is what we want to talk about next time. If there's going to be a next time, what's your plan there?
Don't have a plan. I know there are a lot of topics that people are probably interested in.
Okay.
I know I've been getting some feedback on the concept of TIF and how we apply that. And, some people have a knee-jerk reaction to TIF, and I don't think it's warranted. I used to until I understood it a little better. It's not always a bad guy.
Right.
And so there's a topic. There's probably lots of topics that we could get into. But
so what we'll do is we'll call the ball here. We're an hour and 2 minutes here. And is there anything else you want to cover real quick in this segment?
I don't think so. I think if people are concerned about the taxes, they need to get a hold of their city councilman or get a hold of all 5 if you can and squawk. If there's any other topic you want to go after, let us know. I recently had somebody come to me with a very specific problem, and we were able to work that through a little bit, but there's always room to look at things. So.
Okay. And what we'll do is we'll put a fork in it here. Dennis Fisher, the mayor of Dayton, Minnesota, which is 55327. We'll put this out for you guys to hear. Dennis, thank you very much for coming to the studio and doing some clarification.
Thank you for having me out.
Okay, for Mayorcast, I don't even know what we're going to call this yet, but we'll figure out a name by next time. And thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll make sure everybody gets a copy and it's out in social.